Joining us now from Kentucky, GOP Senator Rand Paul. Senator, we'll get to the procedural questions about the Senate trial that I know you're concerned about in a moment. But first, you just heard Liz Cheney. Does President Trump bear any responsibility for the attack on the Capitol on January 6th?
You know, I opposed the notion of, which I think was a misguided notion, of voting to overturn the election either with Congress or with the vice president. But I think if we're going to criminalize speech and somehow impeach everybody who says, oh, go fight to hear your voices heard, I mean, really, we ought to impeach Chuck Schumer then. He went to the Supreme Court, stood in front of the Supreme Court and said specifically, hey, Gorsuch, hey, Kavanaugh, you've unleashed a whirlwind and you're going to pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you continue with these awful decisions. This inflammatory wording, this violent rhetoric of Chuck Schumer was so bad that the Chief Justice, who rarely says anything publicly, immediately said this kind of language is dangerous, as a mob tried to invade the Supreme Court. So if people want to hold President Trump accountable for language, there has to be a consistent standard. And to my mind, it's a partisan farce because they're not doing anything to Chuck Schumer, not doing anything to Representative Omar, not doing anything to Maxine Waters. It's just not fair. It's just partisan politics under a different name.
This is the case that the Democratic House managers will make before the Senate this next week. They will note that Mr. Trump tweeted his followers a number of tweets, but one of them to come to a big protest on January 6th. Be there, will be wild, he wrote. And then they will play videos of what happened that day, what he said, how they reacted. We made our own compilation of those, including some clips that are circulating on the internet. Take a look, Senator.
We fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Take the Capitol! Take the Capitol!
Senator, you talk about other people who have said things, but, you know, there had been weeks of misrepresentations about the election. Then he called people to come to Washington. Then he talks about fighting like hell. People in the crowd are talking about going to the Capitol, and then they demand to find Speaker Pelosi and to hang Mike Pence, the Vice President of the United States. Is that not incitement for insurrection?
I don't condone any of the language, and like I say, I opposed philosophically and voted against overturning the election. However, I think you're going to see the Trump defense play video of Maxine Waters telling crowds to mob Trump administration in restaurants and attack them. They'll probably show clips of Cory Booker saying, get up in their face of these Congress people. You'll probably see comments from Representative Omar wishing and celebrating the violence that happened to me when I had 6 ribs broken and part of my lung removed. I think you're going to see all of this, and people are going to have to judge for themselves. Are we going to impeach and potentially criminally prosecute people for political speech when they say, get up and fight for your country, let your voices be heard? Has nobody in this country heard of figurative speech? You can argue that his position was wrong and that it was misguided. I accept all of that. But if you're going to criminalize his speech, you have to do it with the same standard. You can't just criminalize Republican speech and ignore all the Democrats who have incited violence. Look at the mayor of Seattle. She went on and on about this being a summer of love. Kamala Harris went forward and said, we should bail out these violent protesters. One of them has gotten out 3 times, committed crimes 3 times, including cracking the skull, fracturing the skull, and causing a brain injury after Kamala Harris advocated for getting him out of prison. So the thing is we can't just have a double standard. Both parties have to be treated the same. Okay. If I think Democrats had any bit of self-reflection, they would be saying this is a really terrible idea.
All right, let's talk about the other issue, which is the one that you raised, I guess, a week and a half ago, which is whether this whole procedure, this whole trial is constitutional. You offered a motion contending it is not because you said a former president, a president who has left office, cannot be the subject of a Senate trial. The other side argues that under that standard, a president could abuse his power, quit at the last minute and could not be held accountable by the Senate for, obviously, if it's a legal crime, he could be, but for a political crime, the Senate would be unable to touch him under your standard.
I think that argument ignores the fact that, yes, the president can be prosecuted. And if they think he incited a riot or an insurrection, which is such an overstatement and such a conclusion without any sort of presentation of evidence, all the left-wing media just concludes it. But the thing is yes, they can take him to court. They can take him to trial and do it. I think he has suffered under public opinion. His numbers are greatly reduced. And so I think there's all kinds of punishment. But we have to look, we've had a country for 250 years. And every other Congress thought it was unwise to keep, going after an ex-president. Constitutional scholars like Professor Wallace have said that the Constitution says you impeach and disqualify. If the person isn't there to impeach, you can't do either one of them. And so there are constitutional experts that say,
Senator Paul,
also 44 of my colleagues.
Senator Paul, that's not quite true. If I may, in 1876. The then Secretary of War, William Belknap, serving under Ulysses S. Grant, was about to be impeached for accepting bribes. He raced to the White House and resigned, but the House impeached him anyway, and the Senate decided that it had the authority to try him, and it did try him, and although a majority sought to remove him to convict him, they didn't get the 2/3. But isn't that the 1876 case of William Belknap a solid precedent?
No, because we've never impeached a president because we always thought it would destroy and tear up the country and divide us further. The thing is when you look at impeaching the president, the Constitution has some very specific requirements. It says when the president is impeached, the Chief Justice shall preside. And to me, this is one of the shocking things when we showed up and we found out that, yes, Chuck Schumer had called Justice Roberts, and this hasn't been reported widely, but he did. And Justice Roberts said, heck no, I'm not coming across the street because you're not impeaching the president. This was a strong signal to all of us that this was going to be a partisan hearing with a Democrat in the chair who's already voted for impeachment. You think we're going to get any fair rulings out of a Democrat that's already expressed favor for impeaching him previously and is going to vote this time to impeach him? So it is a farce. It is unconstitutional, but more than anything, it's unwise and going to divide the country. If Biden thinks he really, if he really meant anything about that unity and he really wanted to be a statesman, you know what he would have done? He would have come out and told his party, enough's enough. Let's move on. We won the election and let's move on with our agenda. But instead, they can't let go of President Trump and they're going to keep kicking and kicking and kicking. But to the rest of the country and to most of the Republicans, it looks like bitter rancor that they can't get the election. They can't get over the election.
Senator, I got about a minute left. I want to ask you a couple of quick procedural questions. Do you think the Senate will call witnesses? How long do you think the trial will last? And is there any chance that the Senate will vote to convict Donald Trump?
Zero chance of conviction. 45 Republicans have said it's not even a legitimate proceeding. So it's really over before it starts. As far as witnesses, I think unlikely to be witnesses. If they do want witnesses, there's going to be so much evidence that the president had nothing to do with this. It was planned previously on Facebook. The bombs were planted the night before. People were attacking the Capitol who weren't part of the speech. They were already attacking the Capitol while he was just beginning to give the speech down there. There's all kinds of evidence that goes against them. The FBI is investigating all these people. People being investigated are being investigated.
And how long do you,
plotting this in advance.
And Senator, how long do you think it'll last?
Hopefully as short as possible, because this is really bad for the country. So I'm for getting it over within a couple of days and moving on. And look, let's debate policy and let's quit sort of just all this craziness that everything has to be about attacking President Trump.
Senator Paul, thank you. Thanks for joining us today. Always good to talk with you, sir.
Thank you.